Welcome, everyone, and thank you all so much for joining us today, this afternoon, for our program with our esteemed alumni panel. Today's program is Professionality Without Sacrificing Individuality, bringing your true self to the interview and office. So I'd like to welcome our alumni today, and I'll start out by just introducing each person and then letting them tell you a little bit about their background and what they're doing now. So today we are joined by Albert Berry, who is a 2003 alum. He is the Deputy Chief of Violent Crimes for the United States Attorney's Office in the Northern District of Illinois in Chicago. Welcome, Albert. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, thank you. Let me just start this by saying that all the opinions that I give are my own and not anybody else's or the Department of Justice's. And with that said, you'll get mostly unfiltered me. I'm an alum from Albany Law School in 2003, doesn't feel that long. I guess I'm pushing 20 years now. So I've been out for a while, but I like to tell everybody I've had many jobs, but they've all led me to the best one that I've had, which is the United States Attorney's Office. Came out of Albany Law School, worked at the Manhattan DA's. I worked at Clifford Chance first, which is an international law firm in New York. Was there for about 3 years, and then I went to Manhattan DA's office for 5. Out of there, wife got a job out of fellowship and moved the whole family out to Chicago, where we had to start over again. Started over, went through a series of things, led me to CTA, as a torts attorney, defendant CTA, then to the Illinois Attorney General's office, doing financial crimes, and finally to the U.S. Attorney's Office after applying 3 times and finally getting in. I've been here for 5.5 years now, and for the last year, I've been the deputy of the violent crime section, the U.S. Attorney's Office in Northern District of Illinois, which is technically Chicago, because that's where most of the violent crime comes from. So at this point, got the United States statute book and studying every crime that's in there to try to help bring down the crime rate out here in Chicago. So that's me in a nutshell.
Thanks very much, Albert. Thank you. And thank you for being here this afternoon.
Thanks.
And next, I'd like to introduce Matthew Skinner. Matthew is a 2009 alum. He is the Executive Director of the Richard C. Fela LGBTQ Commission at the New York State Unified Court System. Welcome, Matthew. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. Thanks so much for inviting me, Mary, and it's great to see Joanne and Meg and so many old friends from Albany Law School. And I'm delighted to be here today and to meet a couple new alums as well. As you mentioned, I work for the Fela Commission at the New York State Court System. When I first graduated from law school, I clerked for 2 years for Judge Eaton at the Court of International Trade in New York City. I then practiced for 2 years in the litigation department at Proskauer Rose. I then was the executive director for 4 years at the LGBT Bar Association and Foundation of Greater New York. And my last 4 years have been here with the Fela Commission. So a mix of clerking, practicing, running a nonprofit, and now working for a government agency.
Fantastic. Very accomplished. Thank you very much, Matthew. Thank you for being here. Janita O'Connor. Janita graduated in 2014 from Albany Law School, and she is the Regional Compliance Officer for Ethics and Compliance in the U.S. for Twitter. Welcome, Janita. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Hey, everyone. As you mentioned, I'm Janita. So I was in the joint degree JD MBA program at Albany Law. I kind of went into that program knowing that I was not going to be hanging out in the courtroom. Wasn't my jam. And so I kind of did that program to figure out what's the best way to kind of move my career into like the corporate sector. That was kind of just where I felt like I belonged. And so I focused a lot of my field placement work and my internships around really getting into corporate compliance. So I worked at the Joint Commission on Public Ethics. I interned there. I also interned for the State University of New York Research Foundation. And then I ended up working for them after graduation. So this is kind of timely, or kind of consistent with what kind of my kind of mantra was, which was start prepping for your job after law school from the get-go. And that's kind of what I did. So I interned with them for a couple years. And then when I graduated, they hired me. And then I stayed with them for a few years, moved up to the deputy compliance officer there, and then decided it was time to head back down towards New York City. So worked as the compliance program manager for Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center for a couple of years. And most recently made the shift over to tech, very different from my previous jobs, but still in compliance and ethics. And that's where I'm at now.
Amazing. Kudos to you, Janita. Incredible career so far. Thank you for being here this afternoon. And Alicia Johnson, our most recent graduate. Alicia is an alumna from the class of 2020, and she is a judicial law clerk for the DC Court of Appeals. Welcome, Alicia. Do you want to give us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, thank you for having me. So I am a law clerk for the DC Court of Appeals. So a majority of what I do is research and writing for the senior judges, which is 6 judges I work for. And it's very similar to first year lawyering when you had to write your appellate briefs. And essentially, I'm the person that decides which brief is the better argument based on what the law is and based on the facts. I started last August and I'm going to end this August. After that, I'm going to clerk for a federal magistrate. And so before I did my clerkships as well, because I graduated a semester early from law school and took the February bar, I did work for a boutique law firm in Albany, boutique litigation firm, and it was great. But that's all my experience thus far. I'm still a baby lawyer.
Well, you're doing great. You're getting great experience. And I can't wait to see where you go. A lot of options. All right, so I just want to start off with some questions here for our panelists, but I want to encourage any of our students, if you have questions as we are having this conversation, please feel free to unmute and ask. We're really lucky to sort of have a small group here today, so this conversation can be intimate and more one-on-one. You can also use the chat, and you can send me something directly if you don't want to ask your question out loud. I'm always happy to read from the chat. All right, so I think we have all heard a lot of late about showing up authentically to a job interview and at our work. So I'm really curious to hear from all of you about what that means to you. Janita, I'm going to start with you because your box just lit up on my screen.
What does that mean to me? So I think it started really when I was in law school. And I think you've got folks who they know what they're going to do. They've got the path down and they know what classes they want to take. They know exactly where they want to start to intern. They've kind of got their targets. And that's great. And I admire the folks that kind of had that laid out. But I pretty much knew early on, like, okay, that's not my path. Keeping that in mind and the opportunities that I searched for, making sure that whatever I was going to spend my time on was aligned with what my long-term goals were, allowed me to bring, I think, my authentic self when I engage those, potential employers, because the easy part was the passion. Like, I love what I do. I really want to do this. I want to work for you. And I didn't have to worry about, I think, feigning interest just for the sake of landing the job opportunity. So I think the first part for me was really just like, is this aligned with what my goals are? Is this someplace that I really want to work and I want to spend, the few hours that I've got and I'm not studying, am I positioned to deliver my best work?
So I have just really quickly, how did you figure out what your goals were in law school? what did you do to think about setting those goals and identifying those values for yourself?
So I was lucky. I did intern for Judge Teresi prior to joining Albany Law. So I did some interning before I got to law school, and I pretty quickly was like, oh, I hate this. So I kind of already knew, okay, don't play around. Let's not go down this path. You know, you don't like this. And to be honest, my initial path of what I wanted to go down was when I had signed on to do the MBA program, my thought was I was going to go into marketing because I really wanted to go like the corporate leadership route. And for me, it was a matter of just having I think, two really strong educational backgrounds that would support me in that path. But you know, part of that program, you have to intern for 300 hours to graduate. So in addition to doing law school, you still have to figure out how to cram that in. And I looked for internships. I was kind of doing some volunteer work during the summer, and I met someone who ended up being the chief compliance officer for the Research Foundation, who offered me an internship. I did not really know what compliance was, wasn't quite sure what he did, but heard about his resume. He seemed like a really smart person that I should learn from. So I decided I would just take the chance. Like, my rule is somebody opens a door, you just run through it, right? Like, somebody reaches out, you reach back. So I took the opportunity, I learned from him, and then I realized compliance was a viable career. And then I was like, okay, I like this. This can actually be a real job. Let me put together a real plan. And then I showed up at the field placement office and said, help me make this a reality. So we talked about it. We looked at what internships would make sense that would align to that career. I was realistic. I did research. I realized there weren't a lot of junior level compliance positions. So how do I get that, 3 years experience coming out of law school? Let's bulk it up with some real heavy field placements and make sure that you're kind of collecting all of the right skills that they're going to be asking for. So I think it started with me. I knew what I didn't want to do. I knew what my longer term, I think, aspirations were. Did I know the exact path? No, but I think I allowed myself to be open to finding the right direction to go in and then coming up with a plan once I had some sort of direction.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you for that. I'm going to go to Albert. Albert, same question. What does it mean to you to show up authentically?
So I'll go a little bit away from what Janita was talking about. For me, I remember I grew up in Brooklyn, New York as a hip hop kid. So I thought authentic was, hey, I have to be me all the time. It's that 90s baggy clothes, Timberland boots, and things like that. But that's not authentic. And you can't do that in the world of law and litigation. But to me, showing up authentic is keeping my personality, keeping what makes me, not trying to adjust to someone else. People, a lot of different ways to skin a cat. People do things different ways. But I think when you first come out of law school, when you step into these bigger, at least for me, when you step into these bigger law firms or these bigger prosecution places or defense places, maybe, you try to become someone else. Because you see that person being successful or moving about things in their way. When in reality, I believe what you're supposed to do is be yourself and take a little bit from everybody to make yourself the kind of litigator or lawyer that you want to be. So that took me a while. And for me, that's what showing up authentic means. I won't lose myself in my job. Look, I prosecute people for crimes and put them in prison, but I feel like I'm not losing myself in that. You don't lose yourself in the power of it. You don't lose yourself in the thought that, hey, somebody's going to prison for 2 years and that's not enough because somebody's leaving society and their family for 2 years. So when I first came out, it was more of law school. It was more, hey, I want to be like that person and trying to be that way. But then I kind of adjusted and realized, look, I have to be me. And I have to feel comfortable going home as me and waking up as me, so I can take a little bit from everybody. So for me, that's showing up authentic. And I do that now. No one's going to take me out of my person.
I love that. And I love that you acknowledge it takes time, right? It takes time to ground yourself enough in your own professional identity to make sure that you're standing in your values. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Matthew, what does it mean to you to show up authentically?
So I guess sort of, I want to maybe rewind to earlier in my career. The last 10 years or so, I've worked full-time at LGBT organizations. So it's been less complicated to be myself when you're working with all LGBT people all day, every day, basically, or most of the time. But, you know, when I first got out of law school, I think it was more of a challenge. And I think a lot of like uncharted waters for me in terms of working for the judge and working at a big law firm. And I guess my advice to current law students would be to, you know, work hard. And it's not always perfectly possible, and certainly don't give up on maybe a great opportunity if it's not a full-time LGBT organization and you're LGBT, but have like sort of an open mind going into another workplace where, you know, it may not be a majority of people from your community. It probably won't be. But I would say also have an open mind to being part of like being sort of someone who can maybe help change the organization to become a better, more inclusive organization. I would say some of the people that I initially worked for there could sometimes be interactions that were awkward or cringy. But I think if you give people a chance to grow and learn, there's opportunities out there to really help make institutions better for folks from your community without sacrificing your personal authenticity. You know, I do want to jump on what Albert said earlier about, you know, in the legal profession, it does involve some level of shedding who you are, just in terms of like what you might want to what you might be most comfortable wearing to work, or things like that. There's a certain level of professionalism that involves, unfortunately, losing a piece of yourself in one way or another. But I think there are ways to also find ways to maintain your genuine self at work without sacrificing your core identity. And you absolutely, you know, should be in workplaces where you can bring your full selves to work. You know, don't feel like you have to give up your total identity for a job. It's never quite worth that. But it's also, I would say, also give coworkers, bosses, supervisors a chance. There's a lot of people out there that are just unfortunately not as culturally aware as we might like everyone to be at all times. And I think there are going to be moments in your career that are awkward or uncomfortable, but give people a chance to learn and grow from you, and hopefully leave that you know, someday leave that workplace as a place that has an even better environment for people that come behind you.
Thank you, Matthew, for that very gracious and compassionate advice.
Well said.
Alicia, and I promise you're not going to be the last person to talk every time. I promise. Tell us a little bit about what showing up authentically means to you.
So for me personally, I think it just means, you know, being yourself at work, but not only being yourself, but being the best version of yourself. So just trying to highlight all of your strengths and your personality and minimizing like your weaknesses, so that you're not showcasing them in the workplace or in the interview. So for instance, I like to joke a lot. And when I talk to like my colleagues or something, like, you know, we would joke around and we would talk about our interests. You know, we would talk about traveling, about cooking, and like you see, you know, it's good to get to know people and to highlight the things that you like to do and find those common ground with people. I think that, you know, that you should showcase the things that you like to do maybe outside of the workplace, so that you can build, you know, common ground with the person that you're talking to, your colleagues, your interviewer, and, you know, they'll open up to you more, and, you know, it'll open some other doors for you.
Terrific. Thank you for that. So you both, Alicia and Matthew, touched upon this just a little bit, and I'd love to sort of follow up on this with this question. In terms of showing up authentically for an interview, right? In our legal profession, which is very, I'll say, conservative and traditional, right? And the professional norms have by and large been set by white hetero men, right? How can we show up authentically on those interviews without risking, right, implicit bias derailing our opportunities?
So I would say that this is something that I'm still learning, and that it takes time and experience, because like I am a Black female, so I'm always thinking that I might be judged implicitly because of that. So I'm always trying to make sure that I tone down the way I talk with my hands a lot, because I'm from New York City. So I always try to tone that down and like put my hands like in front of me. I talk fast, so I try to slow it down. So I'm always subconsciously making sure that my body posture is right, that I'm not using, slang or incorrect English, which I mean, you should be doing in an interview anyways, because you're trying to be professional. But I think that I go the extra mile of just how I present myself because of those implicit biases. And I have to try to do it to the point where I become comfortable and it's the norm. I also like to wear pops of color, but I know for interviews, you wear gray, Black, or navy blue.
Is that still, yes, still, do we all agree that that's still the norm for legal interviews?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think
leave the tan suit at home. Okay. Leave it at home.
So I think a lot of it is just knowing your audience and trying to still show your personality through how you respond to questions, and through the conversation, but not necessarily in other aspects. And I know that I try to smile a lot during interviews as well, because I always want to make sure that I don't look angry or mean or something like that. That's on the connotation of being a Black woman as well. So I think there's a lot of things for me personally that I take into account when I interview that, a white male counterpart may not do that, because they're just more comfortable in their skin, where I'm trying to be comfortable so that I can appear comfortable. So yeah. It's still a learning process.
Thank you for that.
I would also add just, put the organizations as a simple thing, maybe before I say something else, put, the organizations you're a part of on your resume, and try to draw them out in questions that people, the interviewers ask you. And that can be a way to sort of reveal other parts of your identity that might not be on the surface. Some other questions you can maybe ask about if there are affinity groups at this organization, and is it possible to talk to folks from those affinity groups if you're like asked for another interview. Try to get a sense of what it's really like to work at an organization. I know that's probably, I'm not sure where things stand with COVID now and virtual interviews and all of that, but back in the time when I was a law student, I remember there was an initial interview on campus, and then I got invited to the law firm for the second round of interviews, and that's where I really met a lot of folks that eventually became sort of friends and supervisors and such. The more information you can get about what it's really like to work at a place, the better, and getting a real feel for the culture there. And sometimes I think we make this more complicated than it needs to be. I mean, in terms of you yourself sort of can get a sense when you're really having a conversation with someone, just through sort of social cues that are sort of implicit, like what the real story is, or hopefully you can, and just try to, again, be as honest about who you really are in an interview, and hopefully that honesty will also be reflected back in the interaction you have during an interview.
Thanks, Matthew. Albert?
So I think I kind of made that conservative law side a part of me, if that makes any sense. So I've got I tell people this all the time. I wear a lot of masks, right? I've got hip hop me, I've got conservative me, and everything in between, right? So each spot I have to be somebody different sometimes, right? But I've made it a part of me. I work at the Department of Justice. I can't wear a pink shirt half the time. I can't wear a black shirt, a blue shirt, but that's me. I like the colors, right? But when I'm at work, I have the navy suit, the white shirt, and the red tie, right? Because it's prosecution time. It's time to go close. But I also talk with my hands because I'm a native New Yorker, right? I've had people tell me, when you're doing openings and closings, don't talk with your hand because it doesn't connect. But it does, right? So I've made everything a part of me to make me. And I realized that, when you go into interviews, and I didn't realize that early on in law school, I come to realize it, but there is that conservative side, right? And when I go in the door, people want to see that. So that's what they'll see. And then once I'm there, I'm me. And you either some places like you, some places maybe not. And that's what Matthew was saying about, getting into these places that, I'm surprised all these law firms are the same. The difference are the people that are inside the law firm. So you find the people that you can connect with and you say, okay, well, this is a place where I want to be. And those are the people to me that have their individuality and their personalities, and they're able to say, okay, I can be me. If you're still doing the law school interviews where you're doing them on campus, initially for the first breakthrough, it's all going to be the same. Everybody that's coming here is putting their best foot forward. But for me, when I went to the offices, you can see the difference. You can see the legal assistants, you can see the paralegals. You see people look tired, they're walking around with their head down. They don't want to be there. They barely acknowledge you when you walk by and say hello. And that's not a place where me personally, I want to be. So you kind of figure it out. And I think you got to take all of this and make it a part of you so that you can feel comfortable in any situation or any place that you're going to be set in. Because as a lawyer, you're going to be set in a lot of different situations in a lot of different places. I'm the only Black face in tons of places, but I thrive in uncomfortable. So I'm comfortable. If you're uncomfortable, I didn't make you uncomfortable. I didn't say anything. So you can sit in your skin uncomfortable. I'm gonna sit in my skin comfortable. So I just think you just have to make it a meld where it's all one and it's all you, and you'll be better at it.
Sounds like adaptability is the skill that you're identifying, that adaptability. Janita, anything to add?
I would just, it's interesting, Alicia, hearing you kind of share some of the things that go through your mind about not talking with your hands a lot, and you talk fast and you're from New York and all that stuff. And I think back to a field placement class where we did in front of the group, right? We did some mock interviews, and there was someone in the room who raised their hand and they were like, a bit of feedback for you. You talk too much with your hands. It can be distracting. And my response was, well, my hands aren't, it's just not going to stop. If I have to divert too much of my energy to make myself smaller, I am wasting brain power that I could be using to demonstrating to them why I'm the right person for this job. So, and it might have been a little roundabout, but kind of what I said on the onset, for me, it's doubling down on the passion part. If this is what I really want to do, it's shining through, it's coming out. It's coming out with the hands, and it's also coming out with the facts and with the stats on this resume and things that I've done. For me, it's that balance of, I probably suffer from perfectionism a lot because I'm trying to double down on, here are all the reasons why I deserve to be here, I should be here. And that should be your focus. You should be looking over here and not worrying about that I'm not exactly fitting into some special box that really has nothing to do with my skill set. So for me, that's something that is always on the forefront of my mind. There is an aspect, I think what Albert said about adapting, right? There are different parts of me. I was on a step team in college. It probably contributes why my hands are always up. I was also on a dance crew. So I have a more creative side of me. And I have a family. Like there are many things about all of us that relate to people that we're working with. So I lean into those things, right? I think, Matthew, you may have mentioned about like adding your interests to your resume. I added those in. I noticed that the person I was interviewing with, like their son was in baseball. I was like, what? My brother loves baseball. Oh my God, we go to all the games. Like I immediately look for ways to relate to folks, so that I can bring me to them. And I think listen, for a lot of interviewers, part of it is they want to see themselves in the person they're going to hire, right? They're looking for someone that's like them, that they can mold in their likeness. And so some of that is just showing how we relate, and less about making smaller the ways in which I am different, because I think those differences are what's going to bring, like, that's going to enhance what I'm bringing to the table.
Terrific. Thank you so much for contributing that, Janita. The comments that you made about expending so much of your mental and I would say emotional energy, right, on like figuring out if you're doing this right, if you're fitting into this interview scenario, is something that I think author Alicia Menendez writes about. She has a book called The Likability Trap. And one of the examples that she gives is that she's also an anchor for MSNBC, and she has been, receiving feedback on the way she presents, right, because of her career. And in one example, she is told to, as a woman, she needs to be more assertive, right, by one person. And then by another person, she's told that she needs to be more warm, right? So these very subjective sort of opinions about how we're supposed to show up in order to be, our most professional selves. So I'm curious about whether any of you have received kind of contradictory advice on what it means to show up in this profession, and what was it, and how did you deal with it?
I think one of the most challenging things in the legal world is learning how to sort of work on projects collaboratively and give everyone, it is a hierarchical world we work in. And I think oftentimes you don't get as much credit for things as you deserve, or have sometimes the final work product might not have your name on it, even though you wrote the whole thing, and things like that can be really frustrating and demoralizing and dehumanizing. But it's I think you've got to sort of like start at the bottom and work your way up, and for better or worse in a lot of these organizations, before you get your name on things or get full credit for work you've done. So I guess that's my one sort of example of sometimes contradictory advice, in terms of like, this is a really important project, we need you to do it, and you're not going to get all the sort of credit for it later on that is reflective of what you put into it. And so that can send mixed signals in your head about like what's going on here. But it is, for better or worse, how things work when you're first starting out in the legal world a lot of times. So try not to let that get you down. Hopefully it's helping you build skills for later on when you'll get your name on things and you'll get the credit. And but hopefully, there's ways that your superior will massage this so that it's not just totally feeling like I've described, but it does happen.
Thank you, Matthew.
Yeah, that's a really good example, particularly for, I think, like when you're first starting out, there's you need to step up and lead and take charge of this project. And then there's always someone who wants to like swat you down. Like, first of all, know your place, like you just got here, and so there is that balance where you find yourself leading from behind. And there are ways to, I think, have visibility and to partner. But you definitely do have to be mindful of, they're the folks that they've put in their time. And there's some there's some kind of like earning your stripes before you can kind of run the show. And it's tough because you spent all this time fighting your way, to get these grades, land these internships, you get this job, you've fought through the bar, and now you're like, I have to still progress forward, but not in a way that ruffles too many feathers. So it's a weird, you're trying to charge forward without setting off alarms of others who may be feeling, I think, threatened by it.
That's great. That's a great example, Janita. Thank you.
I'll talk from the kind of the litigation side of it. I think contradictory advice is all over the place. You write a brief for one person, it's, use the passive voice, change it to the next person. They're like, don't use the passive voice. you write something, one way, don't put and or, that's a legal term. You write it the other way. Did you mean and or did you mean or? It's like, it drives you absolutely insane. With the Department of Justice, they send us down. They used to, I think it's coming back around. They send you to South Carolina for 2 weeks, and it's how to try a case. And you go down there and your head will spin, right? Because you have people from across the country. Each of them have their own way of doing things, and each of them are telling you, all right, you'll be a lot better if you do this. And you walk away from that person, you go to the next person, they go, you'll be a lot better if you do this, which is opposite of what the last person told you. And you can get kind of lost in the morass of information that you're given. And I think it just takes time to be able to pick through the feedback and going back to being your authentic self and saying, well, this is me. And unfortunately, when you're, as Matthew and Janita was saying, when you're lower on the totem pole, the authentic me is going to be the person above you, right? So that's that person's work. So sometimes you got to take the hits of the criticism to find yourself. But then, you reach a point where you say, well, this is the way I'm going to do it. I remember there was a prosecutor in Manhattan, in Manhattan DA's office, and he won all his cases, but his feet were in concrete, and he'd just stand there, right the middle part of the jury, in front of the box, and he'd just talk. An authority figure, just talk, and everybody would say, "Oh man, that's I'm going to find that," because they're listening. So he's like a professor type, and I think for like the first couple of minutes of one of my closings, I tried to do that, and I felt like I was stuck in sand. Like I have to move, I have to connect, I have to talk, and then you realize, oh, that works for me, and at some parts I can be authoritative, right? And then when you're dealing with witnesses, some people, you have to be nice to every single witness, and then the witness is cursing at you, yelling at you. You realize you're being walked over, they're not appearing, not doing this and that, and you realize I have to be more assertive. So I think the legal profession is just contradictory, and it just takes a while for you to be able to find out, well, what works for me, and you realize as long as it works, nobody really cares, right? It works, and it works on the legal side. Nobody's offended, or maybe somebody's a little offended, but it works, right? You're able to do your job with everything. And then what you do then, to me, is you go to that person that gave you that advice, say, oh, that was great. It was great advice, right? You said this, you said that, I worked that in here, I worked that in there. And then that's your networking. I mean, I think it took a long time for me to figure that out. And sometimes you just have to go through those learning pains and say growing pains and be like, okay, I'm getting contradictory advice. What do I do? But just have confidence that it has to all be little pieces have to make you as a whole. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Alicia, anything to add before we go to our next question?
No, I think that Albert actually said what I was going to say.
Okay, great. So just to answer a question that's come up a couple of times about the recruiting process, the first round is virtual now. So it changed that has happened over COVID, and I don't know if it will go back to being in person, but for now, first rounds are generally virtual, and then second rounds are in person at the firm, just as you all remember. So let's talk a little bit about that interviewing process and trying to make sure that the firm that you're interviewing with is going to be a place where you can show up authentically at some point, right, during your career. Can anybody share with me questions without indicating who they were asked by, but questions that maybe raised red flags for you during the interview process.
I don't know that there were questions that were red flags. There were answers to my questions that presented red flags.
Sure.
Like this one should be a throwaway, right? Like I asked, like, okay, so, you know, you guys have been here for X amount of years. Like, what is it like working here? First of all, there was a pause. The pause was way too long. Then there was a deep sigh from someone on the panel. And I was like, and I think finally what ended up coming out was something around like, well, you know, like around like flexibility, something that had like, it was very clear to me that there was tension and people weren't as in love with their job as I like to be with my job. So that for me was a red flag. Like, I think, Albert, you may have mentioned this earlier about, you know, walking around and you see people that are super unhappy and is not positive. Like it's not the environment for me. So I think for me, it's getting a feel as I'm asking questions and looking at their body language. And even when I walk in the building, looking at the other staff and seeing, you know, is it a collegiate environment? Are people's heads just down? I remember as I walked through and they introduced me to folks, there was barely even, I don't think it might even looked up. And I was like, oh, this is not gonna be my place. And for context, like I get it. I'm in tech. So there's usually yeah, you guys are all cool and free. But prior to tech, I was at a cancer center. And before that, I was in higher ed research environments. So across the board, you get a feel for the environment, and don't discount the opportunity for yourself to ask some questions. That's a chance for you to really probe and get a feel for who these folks are and what they're about and what their values are. You'll be surprised. As veiled as the responses may be, you'll be able to glean a lot more than you realize.
Thank you for that, Janita. Yeah, I recently heard someone suggest that a wonderful question to ask an interviewer is about what the team does on their off time. Like, do you all socialize together, right? Just to get a feel for whether there's that camaraderie outside of work and how close the team really is. Anybody else in terms of red flags on interviews, either feelings or?
I'll add something. I've interviewed, I guess, you know, a couple years ago during OCI and stuff like that. And, you know, one of the questions, it's more so the questions that I asked about what type of work do they actually give associates, and asking a junior associate, what type of work are you getting? Because we know that a lot of it working in a law firm is doc review or due diligence, but I want to know about, are you getting substantive work as well? Because a part of interviewing is that, yes, you're trying to sell yourself, but they're also trying to sell you. So, you know, if they don't have answers that I like about them actually being able to go to court to actually help with emotion or something like that, then it just tells me that they're just being used as someone who's going over documents, but they're not getting actual substantive work of what it's like to be an attorney. And I think that important questions that I like to ask during interviews is always about mentorship and always about training and diversity initiatives. And so I've had an interview where they weren't even really sure, like they couldn't specifically talk about their diversity programs, which to me means that that's not a focus at the firm. And I think that in mentorship as well, like what are you doing? Like, what is the training differences between a junior, mid-level, and senior associate? And like, how early does that start? So, you know, I think that you ask those questions, and if you hear things that don't sound good to you, then you should take that as a red flag, is that they're not actually thinking about their associates in the long term, and maybe just for, you know, the couple of years that they may be there.
That's terrific advice, Alicia. Thank you for sharing that. Matthew or Albert?
It's been a while since I interviewed at law firms, but what Alicia and Janita are saying kind of takes me back a little bit. I mean, I'm a person that, I didn't aspire to be a lawyer for the money or material parts of it. I don't know if that's odd or not, but I remember going into some of these law firms and, they'd walk you into a partner's corner office and one partner was like, take a look out the window. Look out the window. And he was like, you work real hard here. Maybe one day you could sit in the office like this. I don't want to work there, right? That's not, but maybe that's just me. That's not my personality, but, this was, things like that always ticked me a little bit. I'm not a person that I don't need somebody to impress me in that way. Like Alicia said, I want to know what I'm going to be doing and am I going to be happy here, right? I remember, we used to talk in law school about after the interviews where you'd go by and you'd see coffee on people's desks, but nobody's sitting there, right? You see a jacket on the back of the chair, but there's nobody there. Things like that would always be a red flag of, hey, that person is really just trying to make believe that they're there. I mean, it was a lot of stuff. I mean, I don't know. I think there was a lot of different things. I talked to people as I walked by, and if you see how they react to you or if they don't want to talk to you, it's kind of a hierarchy that I don't want to be a part of. I'm not into the thing of, oh, you're a partner, so this associate can't just go talk to you. They claim to have open door policies, but it's like, well, when was the last time you communicated with one of the higher up partners? It's like, oh, they're really busy. Okay, well, that's not an open door policy, So, I think what Alicia and Janine was saying just now is that your questions are really the key. Interviewers are told now, ask certain questions and do certain things, but when you're probing back, that's really the key part. They shouldn't just be rote questions of, oh, who are some of your clients? What are some of the things you do? Like things you can find on the internet. You want to know how the inner workings of that place is, because once the proverbial sign on the dotted line, you're there. And that's the start of your career. And you don't want to be seen as the person that's hopping from job to job, because then those questions during the interview actually get harder for you, and it's harder for you to leave where you are and get to another place.
I guess I'm thinking, and this is not something that happens everywhere, but I'm thinking back to like some social, like out of the office social situations are really tough to navigate. I think in your first couple of years of being out of law school, and there's I'm remembering when I was a summer associate, we used to go on these trips to New Orleans. It was shortly after Hurricane Katrina. We went to New Orleans for a weekend to help build homes as like a field trip as part of the summer associate experience. And this is an extreme example, but like one of the other folks in my summer class got, so drunk one night that they got brought home by the police to the hotel. You don't want to be the person that like is like known as being the like getting brought home by the police during your summer experience. But going back to more like a red flag situation, like, it is tough to navigate sometimes when you're like in a big, just like going to a bar with everyone at work and people are drinking and people, you unfortunately see a side of people involving alcohol that isn't always pretty. And, you shouldn't accept like someone saying something awful to you when just because they're drinking either. But you can sometimes see some red flags like during a summer internship when there is, when you're out at a social gathering and people act, inappropriately off campus. And sometimes maybe that's a sign to you that this isn't going to be, the real side of people isn't going to shows a side of people that you don't want to maybe be a part of. If you've got a different opportunity or you could go in another direction, maybe that's a sign that you can use to have some knowledge of what people are really like as well.
Yeah, it's a great example. And I've heard a few of those stories too about summer associates gone awry. So not any of our students though. Our students don't do that.
Why? You have your own life outside of here to act a fool. Why?
It's like 13 years later and I'm still blown away by that situation.
We had something like that. A guy did it on the Intrepid boat.
The Intrepid.
And he was having a blast, and I guess it got a little, it got a little over the top. And sometimes those things, I guess, happen. I don't know why. Oh,
So
cool.
I see we only have a few more minutes here. So I want to just ask one more question, and then I'm going to see if any of our students want to ask a question. But for all of you, how did you, if you can think back to when you went through interviews as a law student, how did you make decisions about attire and how you would present yourself at that first round interview? I know you've all said you have to wear or you still hold to the traditional suit colors. So you don't have to tell me that.
I don't really think you have to. I mean, for me, it doesn't seem like it's changed very much. Like I just get a gray or navy blue suit, throw on a white button up, show up. Like the standard, I think, attire for these interviews, particularly in your first year, I think is pretty consistent. I don't know that there's anything that's changed that much. I think for me, like, listen, once I left and went out, for example, to tech, then I had a recruiter to ask, right? I had someone who, their job is kind of prep you for the next stages. So you ask them, typically there's somebody from HR who will reach out to you and coordinate things. So it's pretty easy to talk to that person and just ask them, what's the attire for these things. But no one's going to hold it against you if you show up in a suit. I think that's just like the safe bet. I'd rather do that than, I don't know, a blouse and some slacks. And then I'm not, it's always easier to, for me, when I start the job also, I start up here and then I can bring it back down as I start to feel around and realize, okay, it's a little more casual than I thought. But my husband and I have the same rule. Like we start off the first week suited up and then we bring it back down after that.
I like that. Suited up. Sounds like a superhero.
It's funny you say that, both of you, because that's always been my thought process. Is like, there's a scene in like, I think it was in Daredevil where Punisher goes over to the Marvel series where he goes over to the closet and you just see a line of white shirts. You see a line, like everything's just the same, right? So it's like your Navy uniform or your sports uniform. Like every day, all right, go in, put on the undershirt, put on the white shirt, button it down, get the tie it, the blue or black jacket, and the slacks, and shine the shoes, and just walk in the front door. So I totally agree. That's the way you start. And then if there's something that kind of lets you go one way or the other on the meter as you're in there, go ahead. But to get in the door, just straight lace, wear it. As back in the day, I had to remember to take out my earring, right? Just make yourself as straight laced as possible and just head on in there and win the interview. And then from that point on, do what you need to do.
I would say once you get into the environment, you'll get a sense of like what, how much room you might have to be more of your, to show some creativity in your fashion once you're in the door. But interview is probably safer to be more on the conservative side, as everyone has said.
I will say one thing that I had to learn was, once you're in, like you really need to not be like tone deaf. So if folks aren't dressing like that, and you're like, no, I'm going to stick to this and I'm going to suit every day, you also have to be mindful that that's going to come with people are going to see you having some sort of air. And I had to really like read the room and figure out, okay, what's my version of business casual going to look like? Because I don't want to alienate anyone. And it's really important for me that I can collaborate with folks and get rid of any, particularly for compliance, they hear us and they're like, oh no, like, what did I do? And so positioning myself as a partner for business functions, that's not going to stop them from doing all their fun work. Part of that is like being engrossed in the culture. So, read the room.
Terrific. Thank you. Alicia, anything to add?
I would just say that, when I was a student, in terms of interviewing, my hair was always a thing. Like I like big curly hair, but I always had my hair straight, pulled back. I feel like what I've seen with other people interviewing was that they, for females at least, always having your hair like out of your face behind you, because you don't know if it could be a distraction for someone. And I think that that's another like another like implicit bias thing that comes with being like a minority, or sometimes that we have to look at how our hair is. And for me, like I always just made sure to do that. And then once I got in, then I would like show my natural hair because I already got the job and they can't like, can't find me for that. But yeah, just again, with the suits and everything, just making sure it's like just clean cut, tailored, not tight, but fitted, and things like that.
Terrific. Thank you for raising that point.
Yeah, we could have a whole separate conversation about natural hair in the workplace. Like that's a whole, that's a whole TED talk.
Yeah.
I'll just add to part of like sort of the LGBT piece of what to wear to work. Sometimes, we're not always the most feminine women or masculine men. A lot of folks in LGBT community are gender nonconforming on some level. And I also don't want to tell people that you have to totally, if you're not a woman that ever wears skirts, and it's like, you don't have to wear skirts and totally like, feel like you're throwing your normal fashion sort of identity away to pretend you're some kind of a version of your gender that you're not. So I want to throw that in as well as a caveat to not to look professional, but also not feel like you have to like present yourself as the type of person that you're just not in terms of your clothes.
Thank you so much for saying that, Matthew. I think that is so valuable and really important. Because I think in order to find the right fit, ultimately, you do have to show up authentically and to some extent, right? Because if they're going to use the way that if an employer is going to use the way that your hair is natural, or the way that you are dressed in a way that doesn't, they think, conform with your gender as an issue to not give you an offer, then perhaps is not the right space for you. So with that, I think we have 2 minutes. I see Mariah, Suzanne, 1 minute actually, are on the call with us. Do either of you have a question for our panelists? And it's okay if you're just listening because you're at work.
I do not have a question, but I just appreciate everyone's time today, and going through it definitely makes this part of the process a little bit easier, hearing everyone's feedback and such. So thank you for your time and all your information that you have given.
I'll chime in quickly. I am at work, but thank you so much to this panel. It's just really, really impressive to be able to sit in and learn from you, get a little input here. So it was really great. And I also thanks for the Career Center to put this on.
Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you, Mariah. And thank you to our panelists today for being with us for your lunch hour. We really appreciate it, and look for the podcast to be released probably in the next week or so. Share it widely, and thank you so much for your very valuable insight. As Suzanne said in the chat, you are superheroes. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Take care.